We've been travelling around different community groups and different initiatives in Ireland to showcase some of the best practices as part of our project, our European sponsored project, Soil Soul Society. The work we do in Siolta Chroi is mainly around ecosystem restoration and regenerative practices, for example regenerative agriculture. A lot of the people who come to us maybe have come upon land, or maybe land custodians for the first time, land guardians, might already be farmers, they might be wanting to get into farming. So people who are starting to develop a relationship with a new piece of land or an existing piece of land, or develop a new relationship with the land that they already know quite well. And Siolta Chroi really provides a space to look at what is possible in terms of local food systems, in terms of regenerative practices, regenerative cultures. One of the things I think that people enjoy coming to our space is we're really interested in what is that needs restored in human beings, as well as the wider landscapes that humans find themselves in, that we find ourselves in. So what is it needs restored in me? What does restoration look like for humans as well as wider nature? And so part of that then, there needs to be a bit of crack, there needs to be a bit of joy, there needs to be pathways of pleasure, of just being. And so if we're feeling filled up, then the work of ecosystem restoration doesn't feel so external, it doesn't feel like as much work as maybe we could perceive it to be. And if we're flourishing, there's a good chance that the land around us can flourish if we can set that intention. At Siolta Chroi, we are very lucky to be able to be tied into so many wonderful projects. There's so much innovation going on across the island. There's so many amazing initiatives going on at a very local level that are suiting the needs of the people who are doing it and providing incredible inspiration and food for thought for the people that are lucky enough to engage with those initiatives. And so at Siolta Chroi, our symbol is a dandelion. So we love this idea that the dandelion seeds disperse quite easily, and so bringing people to these spaces and getting that inspiration means that in our own local spaces we can be replicating the best of what we're experiencing. A theme that connects everything is local responses to some of the wider structural issues that people aren't that happy with. And I suppose maybe it takes many years of questioning things and feeling unhappy, or just having a niggly feeling that things aren't quite right. And for each person, that catalyst for transitioning and exploring some of the solutions is definitely something that we've seen across all the different projects. Allowing ourselves to fail many times and learning from those failures is something I think that nature does really well. Nature, every year, all the seeds that fall to the ground won't grow into viable plants, and nature doesn't judge herself on that. And I think a lot of the people who are able to move into this transition of alternatives or into lives that are making them feel more alive are people that are comfortable to replicate a lot of what nature is doing. And part of that is trying and testing, failing and getting that feedback from nature, from the local landscape. A lot of the wonderful work that's going on really is stuff that's instinctive to us. It's maybe things that our ancestors used to do. There are things that possibly the land is asking us to do. So a closer listening to the land and responding to the land and tuning in with intuition often can bring some of these beautiful projects to light. So it's not just humans on their own innovating, but that fluid partnership between humans and wider nature can result in some beautiful ideas happening. And a question that we keep asking ourselves and the people that we're seeing is, what does a good life look like? Do you know, what is that can inspire hope in times of despair? What is that can resource you? What is that connects you to wider nature, other humans? And part of that, in terms of Soil Soul Society, is looking at the soul of our beings, the soul of the land, the soul of the ancestors. And what is that we can be doing and being in our day-to-day lives that can feed our souls so that we can live our best lives.
We're a small educational garden. Basically we're at a 4-acre site based in northwest Donegal. Our focus is on educating people about what food is, where it comes from, how it's grown, and also reusing and sustainability. I look at it more from a systems perspective, I suppose, on how we can show people systems that they can use in their own garden and their own house. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, that most things have already been done. It's just a matter of, learning how they were done, like learning old skills rather than new skills. learning the skills that our grandparents used to use. The difference now is we've got technology and we've got maybe better tools, so we can maybe do it easier and in better ways, but it's still the same skill. Making compost is one of the oldest ones, and it's not that difficult to make. Do you know what I mean? It just takes time, as in you need to leave it alone. It doesn't take interaction time. So once you've collected it all, that might take you 6 months, and then you build a pile, will take you a quarter of a day, and then leave it for another 6 months, and then turn it, which is another half day, and then in 6 months' time you have amazing compost. And it only really took you 1 day's work, and it's reusing stuff from your house and your garden. So like, that's one skill that everybody used to use. Out of 1 day's work over the course of a year, you're getting a product that you can use to grow food and grow plants. So that's one of the skills that we've lost, I suppose. One of the old skills as well that people used to use a huge amount, especially on the west coast of Ireland, is seaweed. Seaweed is one of the best products for the garden and for making compost. So every winter we generally try and get a load of seaweed, bring it maybe 5 or 10 of us together, head to the beach after a storm and collect as much seaweed as we can get. And if there's a few of us, we might collect seaweed for a few gardens, not just our own garden, so that we're helping other people as well. It's about using systems that are less work for more outcome.
Like, my journey happened very organically, you know, excuse the pun, but it happened very organically from me working in the community gardens, starting this place as a place to bring and build community, to then trying to create an income and to, you know, to be able to live off the land, as they say. But we live in a marginal land. We live in a very rural community, so it's not as simple as creating a market garden and going and selling our wares. But we did try. We tried the models that, you know, you would see people intensively growing on a half an acre, and a few years ago I thought we could do that, but our inputs were challenging because it was just me. Milo at that time worked full time. We started with the EACEA model, but again, that's 1 full day of the week was where I was harvesting and making sure that everything was perfect, and then I would have to go off and I would have to drive and deliver. And then sometimes the people weren't maybe used to getting some of the vegetables. No, we'll have less of that, maybe more beetroot, maybe less carrots, or, you know, things like that. So our model started changing then into more of a box scheme, that you were just kind of like taking an order and people were getting a box of vegetables and then you were delivering. Again, very intensive for probably what you were getting in return. We tried selling vegetables to restaurants, but then you've got like local food from a very small scale is hard to make look so pretty, so fine, pristine, and selling to restaurants was a challenge because, you know, the weather doesn't always play ball with, we don't get a lot of sunshine. It's hard to keep the slugs at bay from the wee nibbles and things like that. So that was a challenge. You know, I was under a lot of pressure trying to make things look perfect. So that's when we started to flip the model here, just by trying to bring in an income from the people coming to be educated about where their food, they would see the value in that. And then we would make them the food so that they could eat the food during the lunchtime. They were seeing how to grow food. They were getting inspired. Oh yeah, I could do that. We were doing it small scale, and then I was looking at family scale. But then we were coming up, and it was whenever they started to eat the food, that's when you really knew that you had buy-in. And the hope is then they were like, you know, walking away with just that flavour. And I think, like, at the end of the day, we eat 3 times a day. You know, it's something that we should really value and look at as a way to inspire people, is through food.
The big talk in, I suppose, the last 20 years has been about the Mediterranean diet. But we live in the northwest coast of Ireland, northwest coast of Europe. I mean, the Mediterranean is nowhere near here, so why would we eat a Mediterranean diet? It doesn't make sense. You should eat from the land that you're from. Our diet historically comes from potato, kales, cabbages, greens and garlic are things that you can grow easily in this climate. They're things of our climate and our place. So they're things that will help us be of the land. That's not possible if you're eating tomatoes from Almeria. People talk about Manuka honey and talk about honey, but actually you should only really eat honey if it's within 5 miles of where you live, because then it's of the land where you're from and it has all the properties that you need because that's where you live. And that's really important. Do you mean? And it's knowledge that our ancestors and our great-grandparents all knew, and we've forgotten. And that's so important to connect you to the land that you live on. I know that's difficult in some of the bigger cities, but there's still huge gardens and that around them, where we've become very much a supermarket kind of nation. That's not really connecting us to who we are or where we're from. If you're stressed, the best thing you can actually do is go outside and walk around in your bare feet and be more connected to the soil or to the land that you're on. Once you get yourself connected back to the soil, or even working with the soil or getting your hands into the soil, is so important for that soul connection to where we are.
Healthy soil is full of life, and the healthy soil feeds the plant and the plant feeds us. That I think that, you know, when we start thinking in circular systems, the healthy plant will survive the pests and the diseases just like us. So if we're healthy and our immune system is strong, you know, hopefully we don't get sick. So it's getting into that preventative stage. And again, with the plants, you know, we don't need to reach for chemicals because we look after the soil.
Realistically, you shouldn't have to buy plants because you can take cuttings. If somebody has a plant in the garden, at the right time of year you can get a cutting from them and you can give them cuttings from your gardens. And by sharing plants with people in your community, you're keeping that plant alive in the community. So if yours goes down, you know you can go down the road to your friend's garden and bring a plant back to your garden. And the same if theirs, something happens to theirs. So you're creating resilience within the community by sharing plants and sharing stuff like that. And that's important. It's the same with seeds. We've forgotten how important seeds are. If you buy in seed potato, what they would have done years ago is basically grow the seed potato they bought in a quarter of the field or 10% of the field, and then they'd save that for their seed for next year, because the potato needs to become accustomed to your soil to grow. So the first year it won't grow a good crop. Then you save the potatoes from that seed, then the next year they'll grow an amazing crop in your soil because the potatoes become accustomed to your land. Do you mean? So things like that we've forgotten, that people used to just take naturally. Most of our native trees, the young leaves we can eat in springtime, and they're good for us. You can make pestos from them and different things, nettles. It's about looking at what you've got, what's there, and how you can use it. That most things are actually useful.
I would look at a lot of herbs for healing rather than go to the chemist. But the chemist is nearly like a go-to. It's nearly like a default. Your child takes sick, you run to the chemist. So it's kind of like, again, you have to, you know, train up in those ancient ways of healing and looking at the plants to do that for us. And that takes a long time, because that takes a long time to get into the psyche as well. Instead of reaching for paracetamol, you know, to go and look for a plant that can help.
We bought a system, which is a Swedish system called an aquatron, and basically it collects all our human waste, and basically we compost it using worms, and then all that compost goes back into the land. Now, under Irish law, we can't use it on our plants, but we can use it on trees and other parts of the land, so that's okay. Then all the wastewater, we built a reed bed for that, to show people how plants can actually recycle water and clean it. And we built it in a way so that we could have a demonstration area to show people it. And then from that, we would like to in the future to be able to take the wastewater that comes out of our house from our reed bed and take it in a circle loop back to the house. Now that takes pumps and pipes and money, but it's something we would like to do so that we could then show people, look, we can circle these things, we can reuse resources. Like, there is a little loss, but it can be done. Do you mean, if the time and energy is put into thinking about it first and thinking about the systems and that all of these things are connected. You know, like when we renovated the house, I suppose one of the things we thought about was water. We put PVC coated tin on most of the house, and all our sheds have it, so that we can harvest all the rainwater. We did a survey on the average rainfall. Our roofs will collect north of 1 million litres a year. No way could we ever store and use 1 million litres a year, no matter what we do. So if you have the time or the money or whatever, I mean, you can reuse an awful lot of stuff. And there's ways of doing things better than the way we're doing them. And time is the most important one of all, is to give people time, not to expect them to change instantly. People do need time, or they need a realisation moment.
The idea of a global food system, all about export and imports, doesn't make sense to me. Now, it's very hard to get away from it because I go to the shop like everybody else. By the time you pick your basket of groceries, you've probably been buying from all around the world. For me, it kind of was like, well, what can I do? Because if I can't access local food all the time and I don't want to be accessing global food all the time, then the answer really is grow your own. I understand that for people it's not achievable to be growing a big garden, but I think just kind of understanding by shopping the way that we're shopping, it just doesn't make sense. So we have to get back into the garden, and we have to get back into that knowledge of growing food.
For me, it's like if you live in a city, well then you're looking at square foot and vertical gardening. If you're living in a small housing estate, you're looking at raised beds and growing on your windowsills. If you're like in the countryside, you can grow anything you want. So it's really just to show people that it doesn't matter what situation they're in, it's possible in a small space, in a small area. I think that would be the vision, is to show people that they can actually do it themselves. And the more places we have like this, the better. The more like-minded people that we bring together and connect, the better, because then we can influence more people on a wider scale. Showing people what's actually important to live, as opposed to what they think they need to live.
Growing our own food is a challenge because you're trying to make the choice. You want to be self-sustainable, and people think that if you're, you must eat your own food all year round. It's a challenge. It's not possible. The weather, the climate is really against us. It's nearly like kind of the last 10 years of me trying to teach myself how to grow food for the family. The weather has completely changed for the worse, so it's like kind of, we now have to try and look at different types of food to be growing. We can't give up, so we have to keep on evolving around the challenges that we have with the weather.
A good life doesn't exist. A good life is something that people think exists, right? Okay, but realistically, because we can't control life. So to think that you can control, like whether you're going to get sick tomorrow, whether, something's going to happen tomorrow, we can't. So a good life is living the day that you're in. If you can help somebody, to help them. If you're unable to help them, try and guide them. And if you're unable to guide them, well then stand back and let somebody else. Do you mean, don't think you can do everything, because you can't. Don't think you can be everything, we can't. So like, there's only things that we can influence and that we can do, and always look at it in a positive way as opposed to negative, because it's so easy to get drawn into negativity, and negativity is bad for us as a being and is bad for the people around us. So where you can be positive, always be positive. If you can't be positive about it, move on to something else. Step aside and learn something new every day, I think is really important for a good life, because that helps us the next day. Because we live in an interconnected world. For us to have a good life, our neighbours have to have a good life, our other neighbour has to have a good life, the person we're at work with has to have a good life, everything has to have a good life. So really I don't feel it's actually as possible. What we have to do is make the best of what we have and be happy with what we have and not think about what we don't have. I think if we can get to that point, that's a good life. The only thing that's really important is health and well-being. They're the two most important things to a good life. Money and materials and all that other stuff helps, but it doesn't actually help. It's a perception we have. The anxiety in the younger population, because of the digital world, is insane at the moment. And it's trying to bring them back to nature and back to connectiveness, connected to people as opposed to connected to digital devices.
We always talk about the GDP, the kind of like everything has to keep going and growing. And I just think that we need to stop thinking like that. We need to stop thinking that we will end up with the amazing lifestyle that we're being sold. You can't stop it in every aspect. Like I say, there's your food, there's your transport, there's, your home. All of these things are part of the bigger picture. If you could just slow down on some of the things that we're trying to do, the next time that you're scrolling and the next thing you've clicked a link and you're thinking that you need this new product in your life, just, put it in the shopping cart, but then walk out of the shop. We've got a pretty good life if we can just look after the basics,
Once I started working with the bees, I noticed there was lots of issues. When you have conventional square box hives, you have issues as well, that you have to deal with. I didn't like those issues, so I started kind of looking for more an alternative approach, a more natural kind of way, how I could keep my bees. And that's how I came across this, because this is actually those hives that I make It's a very old tradition, like, goes way back like to the Middle Ages, especially on mainland Europe. Still until this day, like, there is like traditional beekeepers. That's the only way they keep bees. They can actually manage bees as well. I didn't really look like off producing honey, like, but obviously I just wanted to provide habitat like for those colonies. When I started to look around me, then I noticed like there was very few trees that would be suitable like to have cavities in them. Very little, because they're all been cut away over the years. So I put them up like in between 4 and 6 meters above the ground. It's just like a cavity, like, and bees come themselves. So I don't introduce anything to them. They just fly in. So that's where we are today. As humans, we assume like that we know better, but time and time again, like, I think nature always will tell us what is right and what is wrong. When I look at them now, like, I'll have bees sitting side by side, like, where I don't go near them at all, and I'll have bees that I manage in a certain way, and I want to compare. So I always want to have like information, what happens like if I don't interfere, and what happens if I do interfere, and compare the monitoring between the two. So when I get observation from the managed hive and the non-managed hives, I compare like the behavior, one that I do manage and one that I don't, and the behavior is completely different like throughout the day. The managed colony is more stressed, in my opinion, like, because I'm going in there constantly, like, I'm altering the environment inside. So I find for myself, like, right, I need to understand better what goes on in a colony that isn't being disturbed. And until now, like, there's very little information about it, because the way the beekeeping world like is kind of steered, everything is focused on honey production, how to make it more efficient, and it's all to suit the beekeeper and not the bees, unfortunately. In Ireland, like, we are on absolute crisis stage, like, with what's going on, like, with our woodlands and trees, because the way we kind of manage the forestry, like, and the woodlands that we have, we're down to absolutely nearly nothing. They're saying like we have like a big, huge cover of 11%, but it's all short rotation crop, 10%. They're all plantations. Those are completely desolate. If you go to the likes of Leitrim or something like, and you'll see the absolute chaos it causes. Like, vast areas like it's planted up with these, they completely leach off like all chemicals that run out, like, completely destroying the local environment. When I start to assess local water supplies, a lot of it is absolutely polluted. Most of Irish waterways like is absolutely full of toxins, and obviously that's because of us as humans. We're pouring everything down the drains. You'll have chemicals leaching off the roads into the waterways, like, and obviously those bees are bringing these chemicals back into the hive. You'll get like a build-up of these chemicals. What actually shows then over time is that if the toxicity like builds up too much inside the nest, it actually has issues with the fertility of the queens and the drones that actually reduces. And obviously we can see that with humans ourselves as well, like the more toxicity there is in the human body, the fertility goes down with that as well. Like, bees, obviously they feed on local plants. Those plants can only grow like if you have good soil. If there's something wrong with the soil, like, the plants wouldn't thrive. And then especially when you're working with soil, like, it's definitely something that should be addressed and checked. First of all, like, how clean is your water? Many issues will come from that, like, if you have real bad groundwater or something, like, certain plants won't grow, certain things won't happen. It might have other knock-on effect, like, on other processes. Everything is intertwined, like, completely. You'll see bees in certain areas, like, they'll go on mossy ground and they collect water from that. When I started to look into it, it turns out that moss actually filters the rainwater, so it takes any heavy chemicals out of it. And obviously the bees must have picked up that it does it, like, so they actually collect that and then bring the clean water back. Another thing is really nice as well, like, is at certain times of the year, bees collect resin from trees. Well, we know like what resin does, like, to trees, like, it's obviously a protection mechanism when the tree is growing, especially around buds, or when you get like growth spurts like in the tree. We might have like little cracks or something, and you'll see that the tree produces a resin, and it's like a protection mechanism like for the tree, so it doesn't get any infections. So when they're looking at that resin, like, it's like antifungal, antiviral, antibacterial as well. So the bees actually have picked that up. They actively collect it, and they bring that resin back to the hive. They mix this with saliva and bits of wax and everything, like, and they create this product, like, it's called propolis, and it's actually beneficial, like, to the overall colony health. So the bees actually apply it all on the walls, on the edge of the comb, at the entrance. So I always say, like, when I see bees like working really hard, like at the entrance, you'll see them kind of layering this new layer on it. And so that the bees are actually making this doormat. So when they're coming back out from nature, like out and about foraging, they literally land with their dirty feet, like, on this mat of propolis, cleanse it, and then actually go inside. For people that are starting to look to do something with land or something, like, first thing to do is get a baseline. So assess what you have, start documenting as good as you can, like, what's already on the land, and from there then you start to plan ahead. Don't just jump in there and start to change things if you don't like something. First find out, like, why certain species are there, because a lot of times, like, you'll get particular plants growing in certain places. Those are indicator species. Say if you have, like, the likes of rushes or something, like, on your land, that's an indicator, like, it's disturbed ground. So you know then obviously there's an issue with the ground is trying to heal itself, because particular plants, like, will do certain things. Dockins is a great indicator, like, that's disturbed ground as well, and compacted. So the Dockins has a big long taproot, and it actually bores into the ground, opens the soil back up again to let it breathe. That then will be succeeded by other plants. They require more like an open structure in the soil, and you'll see that changing over time, where you all of a sudden grow from a very small humus layer, like maybe a couple of mil deep, where it can go up to a couple of feet, like, in depth, where you'll see that the root structure then completely has moved into the soil, like, completely, and opened it up, like, where you have all different organisms in and everything. And I always say, like, it should be common sense, like I said, every person should plant at least one tree every year in their whole life. I remember, like, when I was 3 years of age and I was with the local school, we were made to plant one tree every year. The whole school went out and they all planted one tree. So in, say, your lifetime, you planted then 70 odd trees, 80 odd trees, whatever length of time that you have, like, a whole generation did that. That's a lot of trees. When I go out to new locations, like, I kind of ask around, like, if there's anyone keeping bees. If I find out that there's local beekeepers or something, like, I kind of tend to shy away, because you have to have an allowance, like, for all different type of pollinators, not just honeybees, like, so you want to kind of balance it out. If you're coming in, like, and you're putting 10 hives in one location, each hive can have up to 40,000, 50,000 bees. So you're talking like 500,000 bees, obviously, that all has to forage on the same amount of food that's in that local area. One colony of bees, it covers like a big area. They can fly up to 3-4 kilometers, like, just to forage. So see what you have in the local vicinity as well, like, that you don't overdo it. If you do it wrong, like, it can apply, like, a lot of pressure, like, for other pollinators, because bees obviously very good at foraging. They're very organized, like, and do it en masse. So if they're going in a particular area, might be only one crop or something, they might actually outcompete other species as well, like. So definitely assess first what's there. If there's nothing there, like, you could put up, like, one of these log hives and just see if there's bees in the area, if they want to take it up or not. Just take your time. Don't go in and just buy something, like, from the internet, like, because you wouldn't have a clue, like, what comes with it, if they're diseased or anything like that. And make sure then to work only with the native Irish honeybee, because the native Irish honeybee, the black honeybee, is adapted to the Irish climate, and with that obviously there is less issues over time, long term, for health benefits. Like, if you're importing bees from another place in the world, a lot of times, like, you'll see Italian bees or something, like, or buckfast bees you call them, they're not climatized at all to here, so they get health problems, like, over time, that obviously needs to be compensated by the beekeeper, and can be more costly as well, like, and can cause issues as well for other bees, like local colonies nearby. Where do I see hope? Well, just for example, in my own garden, I mulch all my beds. So I collect all the leaf litter and I put on 6-7 inches. When I came here, everything was just kind of like a green, slimy algae moss, because the previous owners, they just sprayed everything, all the driveways and everything. So I stopped that completely. Took me years and years to get kind of like a normal situation. But now when I actually dig in the soil, I see the serious amount, like, of organisms, like, that's just there that weren't there before. I had no worms in my garden when I came here, none whatsoever. At this stage now, I have 27 species of mushroom growing in my garden. I'd never introduced them, they come themselves. For me, like, it's a sign, like, obviously the soil is starting to heal itself again. I mightn't be there yet, it might take another 10, 15 years, whatever it is, but I can see huge improvement. I can see, like, that the whole top layer now is completely crumbling away. I don't have to use a spade anymore, I can just go with my hand and actually just scoop up the soil, like, and where you have to, like, dig really hard, like, to get into the ground, then you know, like, that there is an issue there. On, like, a bigger scale, like, I can see that there's more awareness of people, like, that they're starting to ask more questions. What is going on, like, and what can we do? Which is good, like, you have the National Biodiversity Centre, like, they made a beautiful plan, like, to help people, to guide people, like, along what they can do, like, their own gardens, even if it's a tiny little small garden, or on bigger scale as well. There should be slightly more incentive, I think. I can see that in the forestry, and there isn't really. It's all about money crops, like, and not long-term. There's no long-term thinking, like, unfortunately. So that definitely should need to change, like, yeah.
So you're very welcome. My name's John Duffy. I farm within this valley system, this glen system here. We farm across 7 sites. So we've got a number of different challenges, which is when you look at the farm overall, you think, Christ, it's a headache. You know, it's a real difficult thing. But the more and more I work with these systems, the more I'm coming to appreciate the little nuance and the niches of each. And I'm actually developing a stronger gra, a stronger love for each of the different sites, you know. So historically, this site came back into my management, if you like, my tenure about 8 years ago. And we let it rest for 2 years. And prior to that, it was extensively grazed with sheep. There's 4 dimensions to farming. So you've got the X, Y, which are your maps when you look down. You've got the Z, which is the 3rd dimension, which is when you add agroforestry systems, for example, or topography, you know, on landscape. And the 4th dimension is time, because we all need to think about how our landscapes change. Our role as regenerative agriculturalists is to see how we can help nature achieve complexity as quickly as possible. So that interplanting is a perfect example of us recognizing the patterns, recognizing the direction that the site's going in, and saying, okay, it can go from here to here in 40 years. But if we cut some openings and interplant the species that will show up in 40 years, we can make that 40-year succession happen in 5. That's our role, yeah? I left here at 17, as I was saying. This is the other side of the coin, right? It's not just about ecological regeneration, it's about social regeneration as well. Because growing up in this glen, the subliminal messaging was like, there's no future here. Yeah? It's poverty, it's like you look at these hills in a very harsh light. And so you say, well, if you're kind of smart at school, if you can do exams well, then get a good job and go. So I never questioned that until I was 30. I never questioned that. I didn't even realize that I was being influenced by that until I was 30, because that's what you did. So a civil engineering degree, and then transferred onto a mining engineering degree. And then I went straight into the oil and gas industry, because my context at the time was, I want to travel, I want to live a wicked lifestyle, and I want to have loads of money. Like, brilliant, ticked all 3 boxes, done. So for the next 15 years, that's what I did. And then slowly towards the end of that time, I had a massive spiritual and environmental epiphany that wasn't assisted by any kind of substances, I might add. And it was really weird. Like, I just stepped into it, and then within 6 months of that period, I was out of the industry. So from oil and gas to soil and grass. So when we're looking at using animals as proxy for regenerating grassland systems, I think in terms of importance, it's the hoof, then it's the digestive tract, then it's the mouth. Because when we have material, say that an animal doesn't like to eat, it's not going to eat it unless we push it really, really hard, unless we force them to get very, very tight. So in that instance, we get them to trample it. And this is what sets, for that small community of plants, this is what sets their time back to 0. So when you open the gate and you let 50 or 100 sheep in here, they're going to go all over the place. But they're going to go the places that are easy to access and overgraze those areas. The places that are out of the wind, they're a bit more sheltered, right? So they're not really going to go to the top of the site. So although they've got 43 acres available to them, they're only going to graze about 8. Because it's lower, it's sheltered, you know. And what's going to happen is those areas are going to get overgrazed. Yeah, grazed and grazed and grazed and grazed and grazed before any of those plants have the ability to recover. And then these areas are going to stagnate. This was one of our first test plots for the equines, for the horses and the donkey. So we put them into this area, we get a good trample, we get a good, because of the way they graze, because of the design of their mouth, they tend to eat rougher vegetation quite close to the ground. And when they do that and trample, they're acting as those ecological triggers, and then they're dumping dung and urine onto the ground. And all of this is driving the development of grass that we can actually see coming up here through the mosses. So moss is actually, this stuff here, this is actually much, much lower on that succession. This is closer to 0 than grass plants are. Yeah? So what we're trying to do here is to time the interventions with animals so that the site, we get enough disturbance of the moss, we get enough dung and urine laid down, and then crucially with the rest, we get enough time for grasses to begin to develop into those holes, those gaps that we've created essentially. And then over time, this site becomes more like a grassland and less like a mossy paddock. Like if we were to take oak and plant it up here, it would have a real hard time. Yeah. But we can use earlier species in that successional cycle to act as nurse species. And this is how nature does it, right? Yeah. Nature prepares the ground, and then, you know, it's not just like a tree is a tree is a tree. You get trees that show up first. These are early pioneers, and then you get mid-succession trees, and then you get the older guys, you know, that come up. What we're actually situated in here, if we rewind the clock ecologically, is we're situated in an Atlantic rainforest. Yeah, a few thousand years ago there was an unbroken line of trees down the Atlantic margin from Norway to Portugal, and we sit right bang in the middle of that. And that's eroded through a number of different inflection points over the time. Some are disease driven, some are climate driven, other are social, you know, with people, communities of people clearing trees. But in the last few hundred years here in Donegal, the 3 major points of inflection are the eradication of the wolf around about the 1700s, the intensification of sheep farming. So we adopted a Scottish style from the influence of our landlords. And then the third was the introduction of a non-indigenous red deer species in the 1800s for sport. Now that deer species is still here today. Deer don't honour fences, right? So they just come over the top. And it's really hard to fence them out, and it's very expensive. So in the absence of the wolf that would otherwise influence and control behaviour of those herbivores, it falls to us to include that as part of our farming practice. Yeah, we need to begin influencing the behaviour of local deer populations, and that's what we're doing as well. So you can imagine if I have an area like this, say, that I've come through and I've planted up with trees, and then I've protected them from sheep, and then all it takes is a deer to hop over that fence and go in, and you know, one group of deer can do a lot of damage over many, many hectares in a single evening. So then to protect it adds another order of magnitude of cost on top of that. So when you're dealing with regeneration at scale, you need to get clever about it, you know. So we adopted a strategy here that we encountered in Scotland called Project Wolf, which is like, we must become the wolf. And the way we do that is not by eradication, but it's by behavior change. So if we have a deer population that's over decades, many, many generations are coming through the landscape on certain desire lines, and we interrupt those desire lines, they'll change their behavior. If they realize that when they come in at the top corner of this site in a group of 15 and 11 go out, and then when they come in again, 11 and 9 go out, they stop coming in at the top of that site and they find other ways around this landscape. And that's what we've been doing. So on other parts of the farm, it's been typically in 3-year cycles. During the hunting season, we really focus on harvesting animals from these areas. So we become the wolf in those areas. We hit them just as hard as we can in those areas, not to eradicate them, but to severely change their behavior. And we've seen the benefit of that. We've seen young birch and young alder develop and young willow develop. Now, some of these examples of pioneer trees that were getting up and getting started, they didn't exist above the heather line. So every time they came above the grass or the heather, they were being eaten. But when you remove that grazing pressure from it and you start influencing the behavior of the local deer herd, all of a sudden in a year you've got trees that are this high and you're like, Christ, where did they come from? When you uncover the stem is actually really thick. So that tree has been trying to regenerate and trying to get above the heather line for many, many years. And the moment you release the grazing pressure, because it's already got a nice, fairly well-developed root system. So the minute you remove that thing that's imbalancing the system, overgrazing, chronic overgrazing, across a massive scale with a relatively small number of animals, in the absence of a predator, the system rebounds. Boom. That's really remarkable. So within this system, without tree planting, there is generative potential. There's a potential for the system to bounce back towards that complexity. These hills should be a rainforest, and they're not.
This bit of kit here, which we were fortunate enough to get, they're brand new. They're out about 2 years. Not the microscope, we've all seen microscopes before, like, yeah. It's bright field, what most days use. You light it up from behind and all you see is a silhouette. You take some of the soil and you dilute it down, you put it on a slide and you put a thing on top of it so it's microns thick, and you're looking at all the wee bacteria and the fauna and protozoa, but they're not in their natural habitat. They've been put on the water and they've been spread out and they're all disconnected and they're trying to figure, and then there's bright light on them they've never ever seen before, and they're trying to, so you're not seeing them as they are. It's a pretty unique one, and the magic bit's this wee black box here. This is epifluorescence. It's LED and it lasts forever, and I can have it at home for the grand price of £2,000 or whatever, and work for hours and hours and hours. So this has hit the world, everybody's jumping on it, and it's going to change everything. I've done more epifluorescent work here now, just myself, just messing about in video, and I video everything, like. It's a 4K camera. I'll show you how fascinating it is. That frequency is the frequency that mycorrhizal fungi fluoresce naturally in the soil. And the phosphorus that's on the living beings is fluorescing in the soil. When you're looking on a microscope, there's so little science done on it, especially the soil. I think we know 1 or 2% of what's in the soil. So when you look in there, like I'm looking at things that probably nobody's ever seen before, and I don't even know I'm looking at it, because there's no reference for it. You know, and that's happening with everybody in the group. Some of the guys that are professors or working microscopes are getting into this, and they're able to tell you what, they're going, wow! Yeah. There's a set of guys you don't want to see. They're like snakes. And the energy of them, they're like, that's what they look like. You look, everything's very peaceful in there, even though it's eating each other. You know, the flagellant's going about waving and singing, it's catching stuff, and it's sort of dancing about the place. And the worms are doing the same, like, you know, and it's really, and then you see a vibrio, and it's like, you know, it's like, yeah. They stand out, like, you know, so you don't want to see them, like, yeah. And there are ways of getting rid of them. They can't survive on oxygen. If you aerate your soil, or if your soil's waterlogged, there's a chance that they'll be there, like, you know. So you can remediate it that way. Different plants you put in will aerate the soil. Or I'm going to take one drop of that, and that's just a little glass cover slip goes on top. Yeah. And off to the microscope. It's an 18 by 18 millimeter glass cover slip. So we've taken a gram of soil, we've diluted it 10 to 1. I've taken 1 drop out of it, and now we're zoomed into it. I'll move out to the edge of the wee glass. There's an nematode there, did you see him? See him wiggling there? Okay. This is called 4x, and we'll go up now to 10x, and now we're going to go up 100x. Now, this is how small these guys are. These wee dots here is bacteria. See them wiggling? This is the epifluorescence, the power of it. This guy here's, it's a test amoeba. They're on a wee shell. They're like a blob that comes out. Some of them have flagellum on them. They're almost see-through. They're very prone to being damaged, or they're okay in stable soils. When conditions aren't favourable for them, say a drying period or whatever it is, they'll build this shell around themselves from the materials around them. Some of them can extrude it themselves and build it, but it's to protect themselves. And they'll only come back out when conditions favour it. That's actually the leg. It looks like of a microarthropod. So that's like a dead spider leg, or do you see it? See where it's been ripped off? It could have happened with me shaking it, you know, or... That's phosphorus there glowing. A healthy plant needs bacteria, fungi, and everything that goes with it to support it in the soil. You need the right ones in the right numbers. And with the microscope you can tell that. So I can tell if they're none of the bad guys in there by their absence. The ones that look like snakes or vibros, or, well, they call them bad bacteria, but they're not bad. The undesirable bacteria have a different coating on their skin. The beneficials are more durable, so they can survive the higher heat. Yeah, the other guys die off, even though they can't help it. It kills them. Like, yeah, this is a bit of soil out of conventionally farmed. It's not great. It's a sandy soil he has. There's no organic material. He's growing grass. There's no flagellates or protozoa. I didn't see any in the whole, when I was searching through it. I've seen a few nematodes. So every time you put a fertilizer down, it comes as a salt, and that just kills everything else. Or most of the extreme bacteria survive. Do you see the wee round boys? There's different types. EACEA, the older guys, and they're like extremophiles. Call them a police force because they're ancient. They've seen it all before, and they sort of the first ones. They right, you over here. That's what seems to go on. They sort of try and get everything back on the way of being.
You're all very welcome to Ardee Bog. It's the last and largest raised bog on the east coast of Ireland. So we love this bog, and we're its voice because it doesn't have a voice, because nobody wants to protect it. My father started planting oaks 50 years ago from seed, so it's an emerging oak forest now. We use it primarily just as a place for people to have a little bit of peace, but we use it as an educational space for children. We love what we're at, and we're attracting good people, and that's good enough for us. We've lots of artistic people, we've archaeologists, we've scientists, ecologists, everybody, and it's just a wonderful mix. So, as I said, it's not protected. We're working towards getting more protections to try and help farmers understand what they think is agricultural land, but it's not. It's one of the biggest carbon sources in the world.
Basically a bog, which is what we're standing on, although it's a pretty degraded bog because human beings have changed its nature, but it keeps trying to revert back. And it evolved after the Ice Age. When the ice receded, lakes developed, and an overflow from the River Dee, a basin appeared where the ice had been, and it evolved into a 7-mile long lake. Out of that lake, foliage grew first and decomposed and fell into the lake. And then on top of that, an acidic evolution happened when sphagnum moss, which is the bog builder, our hero, it grows and its tendrils go down into the water and decompose to a point where it changes its nature and becomes peat. Our ultimate goal is to create the best conditions we can that will allow sphagnum moss regrow wherever possible. But when the sphagnum moss happened, it creates an acidic nature, and there is no oxygen in where the sphagnum moss is. Hence why nothing actually decomposes entirely that's left in a bog, which is why we get so much history from archaeology in bogs. We know out of the 12 species of sphagnum moss in bogs, we've got 8, and we're trying to allow the sphagnum moss spread. The sphagnum makes peat at, I think it's 1 centimetre every 10 years. When you look where we're standing, this was around when the dinosaurs were here. It was evolving. An ecological, I suppose, and biodiversity aspect is it has its own unique biodiversity, because the plants and fauna and life that likes the acidic bogs will not survive elsewhere. So it has a whole unique ecological system. I've just learned all this after I retired from my core job and got the chance. I got the call of the bog and I was so fortunate. Now I grew up and lived beside it and went to school over there, walked to school, and loved the sounds from the bog. You could hear the types of birds, the waders, because it's wet. The wetter the bog, the happier the bog, and the happier the peat. So I would have heard, as a child, the corncrake, which sadly isn't here anymore, the skylark, the curlew, lapwing, snipe. They're the ones that were very common here. And some of them are still here. And in fact, where we're standing behind me down this way, we did record the cuckoo last spring. Human beings have given this bog the death of 1,000 cuts. And we are trying to tilt the balance in favour of the bog and protect and preserve what's left because of its unique ecological value, its carbon storage value. The world, I understand, has down to 3% of the planet is peat bogs. But for their small size, they're mighty. And Ireland had 15% of its land mass was peat, but it's diminished now, and probably of that, only 1% is true healthy bog now. If you dip a sponge in water, it slowly soaks in and draws up the water. Well, that's exactly how the peat works. When the rainfall comes in heavy deluges, the bog peat soaks it up and expands and holds that water and then releases it slowly. And it actually protects the local water courses, the river and the local town from a deluge of flood. It is a natural flood mitigator.